When I saw it, the world stopped. I was standing in the garage, holding an old, battered box of papers, and in front of my eyes was a photograph. My wife, Megan, and my business partner, Kyle, were sitting at a table in some restaurant. They weren't just having dinner, they were laughing. This laughter was too genuine, too intimate. Their faces were turned toward each other, and there wasn't a hint of pretense in their eyes. This was not just a friendly meeting, this was something more. I knew these two people were my entire world. Megan, with whom I had been for 16 years, and Kyle, who had worked side by side with me for nearly 11. I had built my construction company from scratch, starting with one old truck and a set of tools my dad gave me. I didn't go to college or have connections, all I had was hard work and determination. At first, I took on small jobs, repairing barns, building fences. Then, as my reputation grew, I started working on larger projects. I remember meeting Megan in college. I was working construction on weekends to pay for my classes. She was studying journalism and always said she was proud that I wasn't afraid to get my hands dirty. She said it was honest work. When I came home covered in concrete dust, she looked at me with admiration. That was a completely different woman. But lately, everything had changed. Over the past month, she had started asking me strange questions. Questions that had never interested her before. She asked about the value of our equipment, our revenue, and how much money we kept in the company's accounts. I attributed it to her sudden interest, but something in her voice didn't sound right, as if she wasn't just curious but was fishing for information. I remember her once saying that she wanted to understand what I did, but I didn't believe her. After all, she had always found conversations about my work boring. Just a month ago, my life was predictable and straightforward. I had a successful business, a loving wife, and a partner I trusted. Kyle and I handled the design side of things. He was 3 years younger than me. I trusted him like a brother. He was at my father's funeral and helped me carry the casket. He was always there for me during tough times. But over this last month, I started to notice that he was acting a bit strange. He often stayed late at the office, he had many calls, and he would always stop talking when I walked into the room. I didn't pay much attention to it, putting it down to fatigue and a demanding schedule. Megan also started acting strangely. She began having lunch outside the house more often, claiming she was meeting friends. I had never heard of these friends before. She had always been an open book with me, but lately, she had become reserved. And now, here I was, holding a photograph that was turning my whole life upside down. This box of papers belonged to my father. He died 5 months ago, and I had only now found the strength to go through his things. He kept old photos, documents, and letters. I came across a box that I thought contained his old financial reports. I wanted to give them to my accountant to help me sort through them. But when I opened it, I found something entirely different. At the very bottom was a folder labeled Family Trust. It was full of legal documents. I didn't understand any of it, but one letter from a lawyer, dated just 2 weeks ago, caught my attention. It mentioned a new structure for my family's assets. I didn't know why my father would have done this, but it was there, and it seemed odd. I decided to put it aside and continue going through his things. I came across an old photo album with pictures of our family. In one of them was a picture of my grandfather on our ranch, which he had built with his own hands in 1953. At that moment, I realized I needed to talk to my father's lawyer. My gut feeling was telling me that something was wrong. And it was at that moment I found this photograph. I stood there staring at their faces, and all of Megan's strange questions, her secret lunches, and Kyle's late-night calls rushed through my mind. It all came together into one terrifying picture. My life, which I had built and considered as solid as the concrete we poured on the job site, was standing on shaky ground. I thought about trust. How much I had trusted these people. How Megan, who said she loved me, and Kyle, who helped me carry my father's casket, could be plotting something behind my back. The feeling of betrayal was so strong it knocked the wind out of me. I didn't know what to do. I had to get to the bottom of this, and I had to do it quickly. I looked at the calendar. It was the 21st day of the month. I had only 9 days left, and in that time, I had to find out what was going on. After finding the picture and the documents, my world, which I had always considered rock solid, began to feel like a house of cards. The next morning, I woke up feeling a profound sense of emptiness. My wife, Megan, was sleeping peacefully next to me, and for the first time in 16 years, I looked at her and felt like I didn't know the person in my own bed. Everything I knew about her seemed to be a lie. Her questions about the business, the lunches with friends I had never met, the way she would get irritated when I asked simple questions, all of it came together to form a clear and unsettling picture. I had to know what was going on, and I had to find out fast. I knew I couldn't confront her or Kyle yet. I needed to get more information, to understand the full scope of what was happening. That same morning, I called my father's lawyer, Greg Palmer. He had handled all of my father's legal affairs for years, and I trusted him completely. I told him I needed to come in to talk about some papers I had found. I didn't tell him everything, just that I had found some documents related to the family ranch and I wanted to understand them better. His voice on the phone was calm and reassuring, but I could hear a note of seriousness when he told me to come in as soon as possible. My gut feeling told me that my father had done something to protect our family's assets, and that it was a good thing. I hung up the phone and felt a little bit of relief, but also a new kind of dread. What if my father's actions were a reaction to something he had already seen or suspected? Did he know something was coming, and was he trying to protect me from it? I spent the next few days in a fog. I went to work, but I couldn't focus. I watched Megan's every move, every phone call, every trip out of the house. She seemed so normal. She would make coffee in the morning and ask me how my day was going. She would talk about her book club, or the new interior design course she was taking online. The latter was new. She had never shown any interest in that kind of thing before, but she seemed passionate about it now, always sketching and looking up ideas on her tablet. This new hobby seemed to consume her, and she would spend hours in the home office. One evening, I saw her looking through my business contracts, with her phone in her hand. When I asked her what she was doing, she quickly came up with an excuse about looking for old tax documents. Her lie was so transparent, but she held her composure so well that it scared me. I've always been a good judge of people, but with Megan, I was completely lost. I had always considered my life simple. I built things. I solved problems. If a foundation was wrong, you fix it. If a beam is weak, you replace it. But this was different. This was a human problem, a problem of trust and betrayal, and there was no manual for how to fix it. Every conversation with Megan now felt like a minefield. I was afraid to say the wrong thing, to give away that I knew something was wrong. I was afraid to ask about Kyle, because that would reveal my suspicions. The nights were the worst. I would lie awake next to her, listening to her breathing, wondering who she really was. The woman I married, or the stranger who was plotting against me. My mind raced with questions. Who was she talking to? What was she planning? And why was Kyle involved? A few days later, I drove to Greg Palmer's office. He was a smart, no-nonsense lawyer who had been working with my family for years. We sat in his office, and I showed him the documents I had found. He looked through them carefully, his expression unreadable. When he was done, he looked up at me and said, "Your father was a very smart man." He explained that my father had created a family trust and an LLC to protect the most valuable assets, including the ranch and the company's real estate and equipment. The documents were dated 2 months ago, just a month after my father's passing. He must have seen something coming, Greg said, something that made him take this drastic action. I told Greg about Megan's strange behavior, about her questions and her new hobbies, and about the photograph I had found. He didn't seem surprised. "This is a classic setup," he said. Your wife has been gathering information for a divorce case. The forensic accountant she hired would need this information to estimate the value of your assets. I asked him how he knew she had hired an accountant. They all follow a similar pattern, Jake. First, they gather information, then they get an attorney, then they file for divorce. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. All this time, I thought I was just dealing with a few strange behaviors, but it was all part of a larger plan. My wife had been preparing to leave me, to take half of everything I had ever built, and she had been doing it for months. The real question was, why? What was the reason for all this? And how much did Kyle know? I was just scratching the surface of the truth. The conversation with Greg left me with a new, sharper kind of dread. He had laid out the legal strategy, but the emotional part of it, the betrayal, was something I couldn't shake. My life had become a game of chess, and I was just now realizing I had been playing without knowing the rules. I started to see everything through a different lens. Every time Megan's phone buzzed with a text, I found myself trying to catch a glimpse of the screen. Every time Kyle called me to talk about a job, I wondered what he was really plotting. The tension was a living thing, a shadow that followed me everywhere. It was eating away at me, leaving no room for anything else. The next week was a blur of job sites, sleepless nights, and quiet observations. Megan continued with her new routine, her lunches out becoming more frequent. One afternoon, I came home early, claiming I had a headache. I walked into our home office and found her on the phone, her voice hushed. She was talking about valuations and assets, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. He doesn't suspect a thing. He's too trusting. That's his weakness. She hung up the phone the second she saw me. Who was that? I asked, my voice much calmer than I felt. She smiled a little too brightly. Oh, just a friend from my interior design group. We were talking about pricing. It was a lie, and we both knew it. The betrayal was so blatant, so open, that it was almost more than I could handle. The real conflict, the one that was about to explode, started with Kyle. He had always been my right hand, the guy who handled the creative and architectural side of the business. We had a planning meeting for the big new hospital complex, a project worth millions. Kyle was in charge of the initial design and budget. But during the meeting, he kept asking about the cash flow, about what we had in reserves, about how we would handle potential delays. This was my territory, not his. I had always been the one to worry about the money, about making sure we had enough to cover payroll and materials. His sudden interest felt like a direct punch to the gut. It was a clear sign that he was getting ready to make his move. I couldn't just stand by and watch. That night, after everyone had gone home, I went back to the office. I wanted to see if I could find anything, any proof of what I suspected. I went through Kyle's computer. It was a violation of trust, but that trust was already long gone. I found a hidden folder. Inside were copies of our client lists, our financial statements, and most damaging of all, a full breakdown of the Coleman Holdings LLC structure my father had set up. He had found it. He knew exactly what assets were protected. But then I found something else, emails. They were to a law firm, discussing a potential new business, a competing company. The email subject lines were full of code words, but the content was clear. He and someone else were planning to start a new company and poach our biggest clients. He even had a list of our best employees, his own little hit list. The next morning, I called Greg. I told him everything. They're planning to take the whole operation, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had never felt before. Not just the money. The business. The clients. The employees. They're going to try and build their new company on the foundation of the one I spent 20 years building. Greg listened patiently. Jake, he said, we need to act now. We can file for an injunction against Kyle, but that will tip them off. We need to be ready for the divorce filing, which I'm sure is coming soon. We discussed a new strategy, a much riskier one. I would let them think they were winning. I would let them file their papers, make their demands, and believe that they were about to get everything they wanted. I was going to let them walk right into a trap they didn't even know existed. But it was a dangerous game. If anything went wrong, I could lose everything. It was a moral dilemma of its own. Should I confront them and try to salvage what little trust was left, or should I fight fire with fire and risk it all? I chose to fight. I chose to wait. The clock was ticking. In 3 days, everything would change. The last few days of the month were a waiting game. I lived in a constant state of hyper-awareness, my senses on high alert. Megan's lunches became a daily routine, and she would now leave the house with her laptop bag, something she had never done before. I imagined her sitting in some cafe, meeting with Kyle, poring over my company's financial documents, and plotting their next move. The thought was like a poison. I couldn't even look at her without seeing a stranger, a conspirator. When she smiled at me, I saw a person who was calculating, not caring. When she touched my arm, I felt a coldness I had never known before. The tension at work was a different kind of pressure. Kyle was now in full-on preparation mode for his betrayal. He was openly asking for reports that he'd never cared about before, client lists, bonding capacity, even the specific terms of our long-term contracts. He was building his case, a future for himself and Megan, and he was doing it with my own resources. I played dumb, nodding along, giving him everything he asked for. The men on the crew could sense something was wrong. Tony, my foreman, looked at me with a questioning expression. He had been with me for a long time, and he could tell that something wasn't right. He just didn't know what. Then, on the 29th day of the month, the papers were served. I was at the job site, reviewing blueprints with Tony, when a process server walked up to me. "Jake Coleman?" he asked. I nodded, and he handed me a thick manila envelope. I knew what it was before I even opened it. The look on Tony's face was a mixture of confusion and concern. "Everything okay, boss?" he asked. I opened the envelope, and there it was. A divorce filing, filled with demands that were so brazen it was almost comical. Megan was asking for $8. $2 million, half of my construction company, the family ranch, and monthly spousal support. She had done her research. She had her numbers. Everything she knew about my life and my business was in those papers, calculated down to the last dollar. She thought she had it all figured out. But she hadn't. This was the moment I had been waiting for. This was the moment that would turn this entire disaster on its head. I called Greg Palmer and told him the papers had been served. "Let's give them what they're asking for," I said. Greg was silent for a moment. He had advised me on the risk, on how this kind of strategy could backfire. He knew it was a gamble, but I had a card up my sleeve they didn't know about. I was going to agree to every single one of her demands. Every single one. She was asking for half of the business. She could have it. She was asking for the ranch. It was hers. I was going to give her everything she asked for on paper, and then I was going to watch as she realized what she had really won was nothing at all. The moral dilemma was stark. By agreeing to her terms, I was essentially letting her believe she had won, that she had successfully stolen half of my life's work. It felt like I was lowering myself to her level, fighting with her own dishonest weapons. The righteous part of me wanted to expose her immediately, to show the world what she had done. But the logical part, the part that had spent years building a company from the ground up, knew that this was the only way to truly protect what was mine. I had to let them have their moment of victory, so that their fall would be all the more profound. I was going to let them celebrate a win they couldn't actually collect on. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. This was about justice. And I was going to get it my own way. The courtroom was a silent, tense space. I sat at the defendant's table with Greg, and across from me, Megan was a picture of poise, dressed in a sleek black suit. Her lawyer, a slick guy from Denver, was practically radiating confidence. They were so sure of themselves. They were so convinced they had won. Their entire case was built on the assumption that my company and the ranch were my personal property, ripe for the taking. This was the final act, the culmination of a month of discovery, betrayal, and careful planning. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, called the case. Megan's lawyer stood up, laying out her demands with practiced ease. He spoke of her sacrifices, her unwavering support for me and the business, and her right to half of everything we had built. When he was finished, the judge turned to me and asked the question that would seal everything. "Mr. Coleman, do you contest any of the plaintiff's demands?" I looked directly at Megan, at her self-satisfied smirk. Kyle was sitting in the gallery behind her, looking smug. I took a deep breath. "No, Your Honor. I agree to all of them." The entire courtroom went silent. Megan's smirk vanished. Her lawyer's pen stopped mid-stroke. Even Greg, who knew the plan, seemed to hold his breath. Megan's face went from confident to confused, and then to a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was giving up, that I was a defeated man. The judge, clearly surprised, confirmed my agreement and signed the decree. She looked at me one last time before wrapping up. "Mr. Coleman, you have 30 days to comply with the financial and property transfers." That was my cue. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder, the same one my father had labeled. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. "There is one final document I would like to submit for the court record." I handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Inside were the legal documents for the Coleman Holdings LLC and the family trust. As the judge read, her expression hardened. She looked at the papers, then at me, then at Megan and her lawyer. The silence in the room stretched out, thick with anticipation. When she finally looked up, she spoke directly to Megan's lawyer. "Counselor, it appears your client has been awarded half of a company that, by law, no longer holds the assets she's requesting. The most valuable equipment and real estate were legally transferred to a holding company, and the ranch was placed in a family trust that can only be inherited by blood relatives. All of these legal actions were taken before the divorce papers were filed, making them perfectly legitimate." The look on Megan's face was pure shock. Her lawyer was stammering, his confident facade completely gone. He hadn't bothered to look past the surface, he had just assumed everything was still in my name. The victory they had celebrated moments ago was now dust. They had won the battle on paper, but they had no way to collect. The judge then turned to me. "I had one more offer. Your Honor, I am prepared to honor the spirit of the settlement with a revised offer." I looked at Megan. $800,000, and you walk away. Take it, or spend the next 5 years in court trying to break a trust that can't be broken. She went pale. Kyle, sitting in the back, looked like he had been slapped. After a frantic, whispered consultation with her lawyer, Megan quietly agreed. She accepted the $800,000, a fraction of what she had wanted. The papers were signed, and just like that, it was over. 3 days later, Kyle's buyout went through. His partnership share, once thought to be worth millions, was worth a mere $45,000 at book value. He left town shortly after, his reputation in the business community shattered. Word travels fast. As for Megan, she took her money and moved away. That night, I went to the ranch. I sat on the porch of the old cabin my grandfather built, looking out over the land that had been in my family for over 70 years. It wasn't just dirt and trees, it was history, sweat, and a legacy. My father had protected it, and in a way, he had saved me. I realized then that success isn't something you can steal. It's built, piece by piece, with integrity and hard work. Megan and Kyle tried to take everything I had, but they never understood what really mattered. They thought they could win by being smarter, but they underestimated the power of being honest and the foresight of a father who knew something was wrong. I had been foolish, trusting without verifying, but I had learned. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's simply refusing to be destroyed. When they tried to take everything and you're still standing, that's the real victory.